Welcome to episode 8 of Failure is Progress, presented by Sweat Factory CrossFit. We are your hosts, Coach Frankie and Coach Keith. Thank you to everyone who's been listening. We want you guys to know how important it is to have that feedback you've been giving us in the gyms. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do wherever it is you're listening, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, wherever it is, Google Podcasts. Please hit that subscribe so that we know that you're listening, and it again motivates us to continue doing this. We also want to let you guys know Festivus Games presented by Sweet Cups Chef is coming up on October 21st, 2023. We're just a little under a month away, and it's going to be an excellent way to demonstrate the hard work you've been putting in the gym. We're crazy to see you guys out there. So if you haven't signed up already, please do. And if you're just not ready to go into it, it's okay to just stop by and cheer on for your friends who are going to be competing. All right, Keith, what are we talking about today? We had a little discussion the other day, and we thought it would be fun to bring this up because I think a lot of athletes don't even know this exists. So it'll just be a fun thing to talk about. What are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to be talking about the theoretical hierarchy of athlete development. And that's a bunch of big sciencey words just to say kind of the triage method of how we would go about developing athletes in a strength and conditioning setting.
Yeah, so let's say that one more time in slow motion for those who didn't catch it the first time. We are talking about the theoretical hierarchy of athlete development. And the reason why we started talking about this, and the reason why we thought it would be so important to kind of put it on the podcast for all of you, is because this is something that as coaches we're aware of. It's in the level 1 certification class, and it's something that's rarely kind of brought up, even though we do talk about it in some ways. It's not directly correlated through anything we do. So Keith, go ahead and talk about exactly what this is in the truest essence of it, and then we'll go ahead and start breaking it down.
Like the actual structure of the hierarchy? Yeah. So it's going to start out with nutrition. Nutrition is going to be the base of that pyramid. So the hierarchy is structured in a pyramid form where you have the base, and then you have the layers, and then you have the tip of the pyramid. So the base is going to be nutrition. After that, we have our metabolic conditioning. And then the next step up from there is going to be gymnastics. Then we have weightlifting and throwing. And then finally, we have our sport-specific training.
Right. And I guess the biggest reason why I wanted to bring this up is just hammering in that importance of each of these in the hierarchy, right? We started talking about this over breakfast, coincidentally, right? And you said to me, well, do you remember the theoretical hierarchy of athlete development? And while I did remember it, I didn't remember it word for word. So we got into it. And at the end of the day, we talk about this all the time in the gyms, right? We have athletes who come in and say, I'm just not seeing progress, or maybe I'm not losing the kind of weight that I was expecting to lose, or maybe I'm not getting where I want to go. And I think one of the easiest ways for us to be self-accountable is to look at this theoretical hierarchy of athlete development and say, okay, where am I not putting in enough effort, right? So going from the bottom, looking at the nutritional aspect, the nutrition is not just the most important part. It's also the most difficult part for a lot of us. So it kind of makes sense as to why it's the basis for everything, right? We can have good gymnastics. We can have, pretty decent metabolic conditioning. But at the end of the day, if the very bottom of that pyramid, which is nutrition, is lacking, something else on the way up is going to lack too.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note that we're talking about development here. We're not talking about your current state of fitness. So if you and someone else are, all things equal as far as fitness goes, but they're taking care of their nutrition better than you're taking care of your nutrition, they're going to see gains faster than you are. They're going to pass you on workouts faster. They're just going to start to develop way quicker. So it's also a good thing to keep in mind that this hierarchy is about development. It's not about where you are right now. You could have a complete and total trash nutrition, but you're killing it in the gym and you're seeing gains. and you may even be beating some of your peers. But if those other peers are taking care of the structure appropriately, eventually they're going to start to pass you, and you're going to be pulling your hair out like, oh, why are they getting so much fitter than I am? Because they're paying attention to the details more.
Okay. Um, I want to read this directly from the CrossFit site, right? Nutrition is the foundation of the pyramid. The quality and constituent elements of an athlete's diet influence metabolism and therefore the molecular foundations of muscle, bone, and the nervous system. I know this sounds like we're getting a little nerdy, which I'm perfectly okay with, and I know you're perfectly
I
okay
love the
with,
nerdy
but
stuff.
I do want to kind of break some of this down, right? Let's say I love analogies, right? So let's use a car as an analogy, right? You're getting into the gym 5 days a week. You are really busting your butt to do everything possible. Maybe you skip the accessory work at the end of the day, but for the rest of it, you're doing the warm ups, you're doing the workouts, and you're really putting in a lot of effort. Let's say your color's orange, but most days you're trying to strive for blue, and that's all great. That's equivalent to, having a nice car and then little by little adding bolt-on mods to your engine left and right. If you're not taking care of your nutrition, it is equivalent to basically using the same gas, right? Not putting in a higher octane fuel that's going to support all those mods you've done to the engine or to the rest of the car. Essentially, we're modifying our bodies, creating these bodies that we're working so hard for, but then we're going home and we're not taking care of our recovery. We're not taking care of those muscles that we're working hard for, right?
For sure. Using your analogy, but kind of changing it a little bit, it would be like if the fuel that you actually put in your car affected how strongly the structure itself was built. Like the chassis would get stronger if you put better fuel in it, or the engine would modify itself, if you put better fuel in it, or whatever the case is. So if you keep putting like the lowest fuel that you can in there, that's just going to constantly downgrade essentially your car. And then if you keep filling it up with premium, eventually you have a Ferrari instead of the hoopty that you started out with.
We've got so many hoopties, right? We're all starting off as hoopties.
I'm definitely a 1990s Honda Civic for sure.
Yeah,
Parts
man.
are falling off.
All right, so then let's stop knocking on the nutrition and let's go ahead and move up a little bit, right? The second part of this, which I find just as interesting, is the metabolic conditioning, right? After our nutrition, let's say we dial that in, and I'm going to be realistic and say we've dialed in our nutrition 85-90%, because most of us aren't going to dial it in 100%, right? We're still going to, have a drink every now and then. Kids eating ice cream, I might want to have a few scoops, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? But after our nutrition comes our metabolic conditioning. Why is it lower on the pyramid than the gymnastics or the weightlifting? Why is it more crucial to our development?
Conditioning is going to directly affect how quickly you can recover. So if you have two athletes, one who is lacking in metabolic conditioning and one who isn't, the one who isn't can do more work per unit of time than the one who, the one who is can do more work per unit of time than the person who isn't well versed in their metabolic conditioning. And what that means is, for instance, if I have a higher metabolic conditioning capacity, I can go and crush a 2-hour workout and sustain a higher level of effort for that 2 hours, as opposed to someone else may cap out at an effective range within that first hour. And then if
Right.
they continue to work out, they're only just damaging their soft tissue or their connective tissue. And eventually they're going to hurt themselves. To whereas someone else that has a higher capacity, they can continue to lift weights, or they can continue to train their gymnastics, or continue to run for miles or whatever, without actually damaging the structure of what holds them together.
So let me ask you this, because I know for a fact, both as an athlete and a coach, and I think I speak for most of our athletes as well, we hate running, right?
Yeah.
And when we talk about metabolic conditioning, the first thing that comes to mind is running.
Mm.
We hate running. We don't like running. If we could opt to not run, we will always opt to not run. Is that in a nutshell what the metabolic conditioning is, or is there a um, more in-depth way to look at this, right? Because if you talk about metabolic conditioning to me, I just default to, okay, so now I have to run 5 miles a day to increase my engine.
Yeah,
That is really what I still think to this day, right? I've only now just started to really dive into this. So give me more information on metabolic conditioning, how it works in terms of what we should do.
for sure. So I metabolic conditioning is short story long is going to be your aerobic capacity. Like how long can you use oxygen as a fuel source to continue to do work?
So running.
Um, Running is one what we call monostructural movement that will allow you to develop your aerobic capacity. Yes, it is not the only one. And in the early days of CrossFit, that's when the row erg was popularized because you could be inside an affiliate. You didn't have to go outside and, like you said, run 10 miles. You could
Right.
be inside your affiliate and you could row 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 45 minutes. It was much more pleasurable for most people because most people, like you said, hate running. I'm one of those psychopaths that love it, but um,
Yeah, I don't know
um,
what's wrong with you, but it's okay.
I mean, we'll figure that out in another life. No, running is a great way to develop that capacity, but also rowing, swimming, jump rope, excuse me, biking, stationary bike. I wouldn't consider the assault bike as metabolic conditioning. It is metabolic conditioning. Let me qualify my statement with that. It is 100% metabolic conditioning, but for most people, the barrier of entry on the assault bike is strength. They don't have the strength to be able to push to an aerobic level. So they're always kind of in that anaerobic system
Okay.
where they're slightly still developing strength and their muscles are burning more than their lungs are burning. So that's the only thing that I would say about the assault
So
bike.
if I wanted to become a better runner,
Mm-hmm.
let's say I want to get a better mile time, could I potentially help my mile time by spending more time on a rower, more time on a bike, more time on the ski erg?
Absolutely. And I would argue the point that you would need to, just like CrossFit, constantly varied, you would need to vary your training if you wanted to get that mile time like within a short period of time. If you were like, if you have a 10-minute mile today and you're like, in 30 days, I want a 5-minute mile, you're going to need all the tools in your tool bag, all those other facets to be able to use so that you can keep the amount of volume up. Because if you're just running every day trying to get that mile time down, I mean, your knees, your hips, your lower back are going to be fried by the time you get through week 2.
Which is why I hate running. Awesome. Awesome. All right. So we've gone through nutrition, we've gone through metabolic conditioning. And the third one, oddly enough, is gymnastics, which to me is probably the most surprising thing just because I feel like gymnastics is such a specialized specific thing. I would think weightlifting would come under gymnastics, especially as we get older. There's a lot of literature on how we should really prioritize our muscle as we get older. And I know that gymnastics does, but it's very different from weightlifting.
Mhm.
So let's get into the gymnastics. Why the gymnastics comes before weightlifting and before sport? Um, Again, this one kind of baffles me for real.
Yeah, so gymnastics is after our metabolic conditioning because once we have the capacity that we need to do more work, we need to have the body awareness and the foundational strength of actually lifting our own body before we start lifting external loads. It's really hard to go from lifting external loads to doing body weight movements only because you haven't developed the body awareness excuse me, to move your body through space. I don't know if you've ever coached a gymnast on the Olympic lifts. It's the easiest thing in the world. It is the easiest thing on the planet. The other way around, it's the most difficult thing to take
Okay.
a weightlifter and try to teach them gymnastics. because they're so used to manipulating another object with certain movements. And again, I have to qualify that statement. If you're an elite level Olympic weightlifter, yes, you have an incredible amount of body awareness. It probably would be easy to teach you gymnastics, but we're talking to general population right now.
Yeah. So again, I'm going to read this directly from the CrossFit site because I think it's just interesting, right? Before attempting to control an external object, an athlete should first possess the strength, flexibility, coordination, balance, and agility to move his or her own body through many different body positions and movement combinations with sound mechanics and confidence. So let's pick a movement and let's talk about that in specific, right?
Mhm.
I mean, we could easily say the muscle up or the ring muscle up. That is the easiest one to pick. If we're talking about that, right? Strength, flexibility, coordination, balance. You need the strength, obviously, to pull yourself up, and you need the flexibility to be able to get into that arch hollow position,
Mhm.
right? To move yourself up. The coordination for the timing to be able to get your hips up high enough to then do that turnover. And obviously the balance, so you're not leaning over one way or the other. Um, and I guess the agility is just to tie it all together,
Absolutely.
right? So would you say that it is more important to, I'm kind of asking you this for me more than anybody else, but I hope somebody learns from this, right?
Yeah.
Would you say that it's more important? Well, I guess, yeah, the pyramid is telling us that it's more important to develop this over something like a deadlift or an overhead squat, for example. Um, yeah, I guess it is. So we should focus more on our
Like,
ring muscle ups.
yeah, talking about not that you should focus specifically on ring muscle ups, but if you're talking about something as basic as being able to do a really freaking good push up, the amount of strength that you have to be able to do a really good push up is more than people expect it to be. Um, there is some flexibility components that come into doing a really good push up. You need wrist flexibility, you need shoulder flexibility, you need T spine flexibility. All of those things are the exact same areas that you're going to need in a front rack position.
Okay.
Um, Coordination, you have to be able to engage those scapular muscles on your way down so that your torso just doesn't fall apart as you're going down to the floor. You have to make sure that your pelvis is tucked in the right position. You got to make sure your elbows are tracking in the right direction. All of those things are going to fall under coordination because it's a sequence of movements. Balance, you got to make sure you're pushing equally with both hands on the way up, or like you said, you're going to be leaning to one side or the other. And then agility, if you want to go fast, you need to know how to accelerate and how to decelerate and when that's appropriate in the motion. So even something as basic as a push-up seams, you're still hitting every single one of those areas.
So let's talk about the push up, and I'm really happy you brought this one up because we do a lot of foundations with new members.
Mhm.
It seems as if every single member who steps in without an athletic background does a push up where they push their elbows outward
Mhm.
and they're kind of almost like a chest pass in basketball. I don't know how else to describe it for the listeners, but why is it that everyone does that? I've seen whenever we teach it, right, we tell them, imagine you're pushing someone if you're about to get into a fight. When you push, your elbows are down, which is how a push up is, arms at 45 degrees. But whenever we tell somebody to do a push up to a box or to do a push up from the ground, immediately their elbows go up. Why does that happen? Does that have anything to do with, the coordination, or is it just because we're not aware? Is there a gymnastic component to that 45-degree angle that we get away from when we're asked to do a push-up for the first time?
Yeah, there's a couple aspects. Number one being strength. Most people need to engage more muscle groups. And I personally wouldn't say that it's wrong for someone to flare their elbows out when they are doing a push up. The problem with that is the having the flexibility to have your shoulder in the right position when you are doing a push up like that. and then also the coordination of the movement. If you are just doing that to compensate for your lack of strength so that you can get more chest involved, more shoulders involved because your triceps aren't strong enough, then that's when that becomes a problem. If you're doing that to develop those specific areas, I mean, there's tons of combat sport fighters that do diamond push-ups, 50 reps
Right.
at a time. You know what I mean? And their shoulders are fine. So I wouldn't inherently say that it is wrong. Now, the reason that we do push-ups the way we do, or the way we teach it, is because it's a more functional position. Just like you said, if you were going to push anything, not just another human being, because we're not all violent, crazy people like you, apparently.
Well,
But
sometimes our car stalls, right? Sometimes our
yeah,
car stalls, and we're going to push our car
yeah.
because we need our car to go fight.
Because we need to drive to
We
the
got to
fight.
drive to the fight.
Uh,
But
yeah,
let's say we're pushing a car down the street
yeah,
because
yeah.
the engine blew up, right?
Yeah. So that is a much more functional position to push. So that's why we teach that way, is because it's more functional. Same thing why we don't do like a crazy ton of bench press, because it's not the most functional thing that you can do. There is some benefit, but we can have that conversation on another podcast.
That is a good point though. When we do bench press, we
Yeah.
do flare our elbows out
Yeah.
and we push from there. So it is kind of weird as to how it translates to a push up. It kind of doesn't. It's two different things. One, you're pushing on your back, arms are at 45 degrees. The other one, your arms are flared out 90 degrees. The other one, you're on the floor face down and you are pushing with your arms at 45 degrees.
Yeah. The only argument that I would have with that is just the fact that you are developing some strength. So that can aid when you are pushing from the floor, even though your elbows are in a different position, is you're still getting stronger. So it may allow you to have more push when you are on the
The
floor.
triceps are getting work no matter
Yeah,
what.
exactly.
Awesome. All right. So then let's get into the fourth of this pyramid stack, which would be weightlifting and throwing.
Everybody's favorite.
Yeah, right. So weightlifting and throwing comes after nutrition, metabolic conditioning, gymnastics, and then we go ahead and get into lifting heavy barbells, right? Why is this fourth important? Reading straight off the site again, the capacities built at the metabolic conditioning and gymnastics levels can be next applied to an object beyond the confines of an athlete's own body. So what we're learning is take care of our body with our nutrition, then take care of our engine, right? So that we can use our body for a longer period of time
Absolutely.
while pushing greater forces, then learning how to control and manage our physical body itself, because we're going to have this versus nobody walks around with weights all day long. If you do, that's pretty cool. The importance of this is obviously in everything we do. We just talked about pushing a stalled car. That happens more often than it should, but it still happens, right? Lifting sofas, lifting furniture, moving furniture around, groceries, not the heaviest thing, but for some people, it can be a lot, right? A lot of people are going to put this one more important than the others, right?
Not more important, but they enjoy it more. I honestly don't think that anybody's like, oh, weightlifting's more important than gymnastics or metabolic conditioning. I could be wrong, but I don't think that people really think that it's more important. I really think that it's just more fun. It's more fun to grab a barbell, throw some weight on there, and show people how strong you are.
So people are more willing to, because as we look at this hierarchy, right, we've got the weightlifting, under that gymnastics, under that metabolic conditioning, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that kind of falls in line with how most people, and you're talking about fun, right?
Yeah.
People find it more fun to lift weights than they do to do gymnastics movements.
Absolutely.
And people find gymnastics movements more fun than the metabolic conditioning.
100%. I would 100% rather do 30 muscle ups for time than that 10-mile run you were talking about earlier.
and then I guess if we go along with that, I think everybody would rather do all of this and even go for a run than have to worry about their nutrition and diet, right?
Yeah.
So
then eat a bowl full of vegetables. Yeah.
I mean, we could kind of say that it's harder at the bottom than it is at the top, just from the aspect of fun.
Yeah.
Weightlifting is obviously something that we all enjoy. What are the biggest benefits for our bodies and for our development that come from the weightlifting aspect?
The biggest benefit is the amount of muscle mass that you can grow with our gymnastics. So, just to qualify or just to define what gymnastics is, as far as CrossFit's concerned, gymnastics is any body weight movement. So, it's not just the movements that you see in the Olympics for the gymnastics. So, it's not just the rings or the bar muscle ups or the kipping pull ups. It is any body weight movement. So, if you're doing an air squat, that's gymnastics as far as CrossFit is concerned. Um,
Okay.
Going back, if you are resistance training or weightlifting and throwing, the amount of mass and muscle density that you can put on your frame is the potential is a lot higher than just doing body weight movements. If you're just doing body weight movements, I mean, just look at the Olympics. The Olympic weightlifters, their heaviest category, those are some big boys. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're not all just chunky guys. You know, some of them are stacked. If you've ever seen Lu Xiaozheng, he is one of the most ripped people you'll ever see in your life. His striations have striations. um,
One day I'll get there.
but if you compared him to a gymnast that's around his same height, the gymnast is just going to be a lot more lean. He's still going to be shredded, but he's just going to be a lot more lean because without the resistance training, you just can't add that much more muscle. You don't have the stimulus to add more muscle.
Understood. All right, and then let's get into the last part, which is sport, right? CrossFit is very much a sport,
Hmm.
and they want us to try numerous different things. So, it could be football one week, basketball another, skydiving. It could be a number of different things. Just talk a little bit about the importance of that versatility and using what we learn in the gym or what our bodies adapt to in the gym and using that for different sports.
Absolutely. So the main thing with getting sport specific is just one, applying your fitness. When you don't go out and regularly learn and play new sports, it's kind of like going to get your PhD and then going into a career field that has nothing to do with that. You know what I mean? A lot of us have our bachelor's degree and don't use it at all, myself included. But if I had gotten my PhD in something, there's no way I'm not using that. You know what I
Right.
mean? So that's kind of what we're doing in CrossFit is everybody's coming to CrossFit developing this, huge capacity for fitness and then not really applying to that and really seeing what it can do in a setting outside of the gym. So go out, learn new sports, play new sports, and then also all of the neurological benefits to like we talked about earlier, the flexibility, the coordination, the balance, and the agility. Those are some neurological benefits that you can get from sport specific training.
Yeah, and I mean, we were talking about this just yesterday. I was using my Indian clubs to do some warm ups, and
Mhm.
you were telling me how beneficial it was to do something different. The body adapts and learns what it is that we're doing with it, and over time, it kind of plateaus from that because, again, it's adapted.
Mhm.
And I guess going from different sport to different sport really helps us get out of that rut, so to speak. I know that recently you got into swimming, which is fantastic. It's a hell of a sport and a hell of a metabolic conditioning workout all its own.
Absolutely.
And swimming is one of those sports that not only taxes you because you're trying to breathe while you're doing it. But the beauty of it is your body is kind of weightless, so you can actually do more, feel more, and you could probably go a little bit harder than, for example, when you're running, where you're against gravity and it's pounding on your body, which is one of the cool things about you getting into swimming.
Yeah, it's a great sport. The only thing capacity wise is you just don't get to breathe whenever you feel like breathing. You
Yeah,
kind of have to find a rhythm with your breath. And once you run out of that oxygen, your brain thinks you're dying. So you just have to stop in the middle of the pool.
but
But
that is beneficial. Speaking of CrossFit, when you get back in the gym, right? Because if you can learn to control your breathing underwater while you're swimming, wouldn't that translate better to a Metcon when you're starving for oxygen as you're trying to run? And, we'll talk about the competition team workout we did this weekend. We were doing devil's presses and a 400-meter run. and we were starving for oxygen between these devil presses and the run. And it was what you were trying to teach us, right? How to recover during the workout, how to find a pace that allows us to breathe when our body just can't.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just learning how to get that oxygen in to let your brain know, hey, you're okay. This is fine. You can keep going at this pace. It's gonna burn locally, so your muscles are gonna burn, but you won't get that like lung burn where you feel like you're hyperventilating.
Right, right. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier, right? You don't have to just run to be a better runner.
Mm.
You don't have to just bike to be a better cyclist. This is the same. If we continue to diversify our sports and the different kind of sports we do, it's only going to help us get better when we're back in the gym. All right, this does it for our explanation of the theoretical hierarchy of athlete development. It has been a fun conversation, and I'm sure that we'll talk about this more in the future. If you guys have any questions on any of this or want even further clarification, feel free to talk to Keith about it. If you ask me, I will also talk to Keith about it. This is really complicated stuff, and we just wanted to try to break it down for you guys and not only explain the benefits, but also the importance of it. One last time, it all starts with our nutrition. It's really the key to everything. And I know that we've talked about this in classes. I've heard you talk about it in classes. I've talked about it in classes. After that, it's followed by metabolic conditioning, then gymnastics, then weightlifting and throwing, and then it rounds off with sports. So thank you all for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. Keith, any last words?
Yes, guys. Thank you so much for listening. But make sure that you subscribe, leave us a great review. All of that stuff is going to help us out so we can keep putting out great content for you guys. Also, if you have any ideas, go ahead and shout them out to us. We would love to hear what you guys actually want to hear about and provide more value to you.
Thanks so much, guys. We'll catch you on the next one.